The thing that I love about design is that it helps create a space for people to gather and grow in relationship with each other. And as a designer, I help create that space for them to come back to. And what interests me most is that in today's world, designers have so many different opportunities to communicate like a human being. Through interactive design, through the classical ways that we communicate as designers, through like typography, poster design, layout, through the built environment. And it's a really interesting thing, like for the backgrounds that a lot of designers now have. I mean, for me, I have a classical background in graphic design, but I also grew up under this guy. This is Robert Vogele. This is my grandfather. And and it was what he instilled in me is really kind of that business mentality and the relationship that he carries through design, through his clients. And he first got his start in the early 50s working for a company out of Chicago called Latham Tyler Jensen, which was an offshoot company of the office of Raymond Loewy. And from there, he really became a pioneer in the business of design, starting companies like RVI Corporation and VSA Partners. And for him, what he really liked to talk about is Big D. And the Big D is design as a tool for management. So his idea behind that was like, how can we take design into your company and organize your form of communication in order for you to build lasting relationships with your customers, right? And really, design was a, he really instilled like this design management philosophy. And like, a lot of what we see is like, who are we? And most of you are probably very familiar with this level of thinking, these 4 questions, like who are we? What do we stand for? What's our belief system? What's our mission, our vision, our goals, our objectives, that sort of thing? What do we want to say, based on that mission and vision and goals? And then who do we want to say it to, right? And how are we going to say it, which is like that form of media. What is the best form of media in order to communicate our ideas, right? And growing up, I mean, I practiced this, as a designer. And as I matured as a designer, I started to really think, and as I matured as a relationship builder, I started to really think like, and then we put it through the design management funnel, which is like the design, data gathering, information research, all the way through implementation, and hopefully we have a valid solution based off of what we came up with. And growing up, I practiced this, but I realized this is a first place mentality. Look at me, here's who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is what I want to say. And then I want to say it to you, and this is how I'm going to say it to you. Right? And it really kind of like say, I'm important, look at me. And I didn't really agree with it. This is my wife. We've been together for 14 years. And for the first 7 years, I was trying to convince her like that I was perfect before she even met me. It didn't work. And then the same thing with her. She tried to convince me that she was perfect before she met me. And it was really that first place mentality saying, hey, honey, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. You got to accept who I am, right? And this is what I want to say, and this is what I'm going to say to you, right? And this is how I'm going to say it to you. And she's like, no, Buster, I don't think so, dude. So she puts up a wall, and it's like, this is BS. So what I realized is after that didn't work for me for 7 years, that I'm going to try second place mentality, right? And what that really meant was, what do I need to communicate to her in order for me to grow in a better relationship with my wife? And I can see this in a lot of different relationships that I have with people and with clients, with customers, with businesses that I've worked with, is that the second place mentality really helped me bear more fruit than having the first place mentality. If I understood who I wanted to talk with, who I wanted to engage in relationship with, then I can then tailor my communication and see what they needed from me and how I can be a better person, better, for my wife, a better husband for my wife. What does she want out of me as a husband, and what can I provide for her, right? And I kind of changed these questions around. Like, we still need to know who we are as individuals, right? What we believe in, what we stand for. So it's like, who do we want to engage, right? So who I was growing up, I was a varsity wrestler, and I was also the president of my art society in my high school. I also skated and, caused trouble with my friends. And what was funny is that, I found like-minded people with this. 4 of my friends on my wrestling team are now in the UFC, but they're also part of my art society in high school. So it's like, who do we want to engage? So I engage with these guys. And then where do we go to engage them? The wrestling mat or the art room or like, the shed outside the art room where we would smoke cigarettes, and or the skate park, or down by the harbor where I grew up. Then, like, what language do they speak? So it's like the vernacular, and this is like preaching to the choir, and I know you guys all know this. As communicators, when we go into the office space, right, into the business world, we kind of like dismiss a lot of this, right, and we kind of become very formulaic with our communication with our clients, right? It's like, based on what my professor told me in marketing school or in design school, is like, this is what I have to design in order to get more money. And what I found out through the years is that that's not necessarily the case. So then, in order to speak in that vernacular, how do we tailor our methods of communication to ensure optimal results? For my wife, if I want to communicate with her, I may say, "Hey, I love you, honey," and I can say that in a text message, right? Or I can say that in to her face, or I can write a nice little lovely note to her and mail it to her, or I can, build a basket of fruits and stuff, or do whatever that makes her like feel good, and then take her to a park, put the blanket down and sit underneath a tree, then have a plane go by and that says, "I love you, Sarah." And then my goal is like, maybe later on there might be some really awesome transaction that happens. And but then we take that and then we put it through the same design management funnel, and then with my experience, the solution that comes out is a lot more potent. It bears more fruit, right? And so this is what I call the triadic relationship. So, understanding like this relationship, the second place mentality that I have with my wife, and then that I'm starting to practice with my friends and with my clients. I understand like what does it take to really communicate with people? And I call it the triadic relationship, where we have person one and person two are trying to communicate with each other, and they have this ideal that sits above them. And without the ideal, their communication is just gibberish, right? So they need that level of thinking, that ideal, whether it be like the marriage or the kids, or for me, our family, it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That we do that every day. But it's that ideal that we share, right, together, and we start to communicate. And the more we communicate about it, or like for me, I work with Kid Robot. People talk about Kid Robot. The more you share about what we're talking about, the closer we get to each other, and we grow in intimacy, right? And it becomes a very special relationship. And then the transactions become more fluid, right? There's more transactions happening, whether it's a monetary transaction or any type of transaction that we have in our relationships. It's a really special thing. So what this really does is, like, if we add more people into this, like a person one, person two, person three, person four, all sharing the same ideals, we have a common unity, which is a community. And if we understand this ideal that we all share in this community, think about the amount of transactions that we can have within that, and how can we foster this in our own business thinking, right? And understand our culture and our community, and tailor that communication to all these different people, right? So I was watching Madagascar 3 with my kids, and this illustration came up, right? And I thought it was fantastic. The hippo, the giraffe, the lion, and the zebra are stranded in Africa, and the penguins deserted them, and they're gambling in some sort of fancy Parisian casino, right? And so their goal in this scene is to actually go to the casino and like really give the penguins a lecture, like, why did you desert us in Africa, right? And so this is them on top of the roof, and they're trying to find a way into the casino, in the best possible way. Amazing. Each air duct or pipe is tailored specifically to the hippo, the giraffe, the lion, and the zebra. It's incredible to me, because as designers, we don't necessarily create that relationship, but we design the conduit in which that relationship is carried, right? That transmission, But what's interesting to me too, as a designer, is like, what if there's a clog in one of these pipes? What if there's a level of interference in that transmission? What do we do? What happens? So in this illustration, there's some sort of interference happens between person one and person two, and they start to move apart from each other, right? They're no longer in a relationship. They've actually, it's a breakup, right? So Bart Crosby out of Chicago is a mentor of mine, and he's amazing at discovering levels of interference within a company's communication program, right? And he gets so much business because he makes it so simple. It's like he uses the word simple all the time. He's like, okay, let me just grab this simple thing from you and gather this, and it'll be really simple, you know. And I'm going to take what I want you to do is simply put together all forms of communication that your business uses to communicate your brand, whether it be through a brochure, your business card, your letterhead, pictures of your signage, your website, whatever, any form of communication. And I'm going to take it back to my office and I'm going to organize it for you, right? And I'm going to discover where there might be a level of miscommunication, right? And in a week, I'm going to bring it back to you and we're going to talk about it, right? So this is like, okay, red, red, red. Here's a design system. Blue, red. Uh-oh, there's blue. And you'd be like, well, I discovered that everything that you have in red is you're saying you're selling underwear, right? And then, but I noticed in this blue piece of paper that you're saying that you're selling bananas, right? So it's like, this is confusing to your customers. Like, do you sell underwear? Or do you sell bananas? The two really don't go together. You know, that's kind of like a terrible, you know, description or terrible kind of analogy of what this is. But it's like, if we can kind of cut that kind of cancer out of the system or redesign that and say, hey, all you sell is underwear, right? And this is what you believe in. You know, you have a better chance of getting your point across to the people you want to talk to. The same thing goes in a relationship with like a marriage, right? You know, if I say one thing to my wife, or if I say something to my kids, this is a better analogy than with my wife. If I say something to my kids, you know, don't smoke cigarettes, right? And then he sees me smoking a cigarette, right? There's a level of interference there. It's like, dude, Dad, you're a bullshitter, man. You're a hypocrite, and I'm going to rebel against you. And we see a lot of that in corporate communication, internally and externally, and you see a lot of breakups happening, you know. And what they fail to realize is that because there's a lot of first place mentality there, like, what I'm saying is good, and you need to accept what I'm saying. But if they can look internally and say, hey, am I delivering the right type of communication to you? You know, is there a level of interference that you know, in our relationship that is preventing me from moving further with you and growing in a deeper, more intimate relationship with you, right? So here's a great example. A while back, we started a Kid Robot. We decided to we have our own Kid Robot Boulder store. The idea is like, where are we going to have this store? Well, this was the only available spot. A $500 million company was in this spot. Life is Good. You guys familiar with Life is Good? And they had and I can just imagine, I don't know like their company dynamics, I don't know this, you know, but I can imagine them thinking like, well, we're a $500 million company, people like our stuff. Boulder's a little crunchy, we're a little crunchy, you know, maybe, we're definitely going to be selling a lot of t-shirts and, you know, Life is Good stuff here in this store on Pearl Street. Well, what they didn't realize is that the majority of people reputable people on Pearl Street don't like to do business in a cave, right? This is a cave. You know, this is not an inviting place. It's dark. It's got a lot of obstacles to compete with. They only had one sign that was a blade sign in between the window pane on the top that kind of jutted out about 30 inches. And then there was this really ugly kind of Pearl Street. It wasn't even core 10 steel. It was just rusted steel that was like falling apart. And there was a ton of obstacles so I'm like, really, we want to open up a store right there. We're not a $500 million company, and that $500 million company failed in that spot. Not that they failed as a company, but they failed in that spot. So, as you can see here, we had a lot of forms of physical interference as far as communicating our brand identification. We have the Christian Science awning. I couldn't burn it down. I couldn't ask them to. We have these beautiful evergreen trees. We couldn't poison them or cut them down because we had had a lot of people upset with us. And then we have this portico that is on the east side of the building that was obstructing the view from 15th Street. Right? It's a challenge, and then the store is dark. Right? It had a lot of vertical space, but it wasn't being utilized. So the dilemma is like, how do we take this, you know, this store, brighten it up for one, and then increase building identification so people can actually see us? I had 1 hour to do this little sketch. It was kind of janky. But we have this hanging sign that is double-sided. That I kind of called it the ruby. It kind of shines. People can see it. It kind of hangs below that, the Christian Science awning and the portico, and it's double-sided. So people from 15th Street can actually see Kid Robot as well. Hopefully we solved the problem. I also brought, like, my initial idea was to bring 5-foot monies. You guys familiar with Kid Robot? We got these 5-foot monies. Very rare. They're like $15,000 each. But like build a shelf inside and bring that up to the top, so it increases verticality in our store. It brings the aisle up and it opens up the space dramatically. This is the final solution. This is what happened. I think it brightens the space up. It's not the ideal space for Kid Robot, but it's a drastic improvement from where we were at. In the past, our stores are a little kind of disconnected now. I kind of view them still as a little boutique stores. They don't follow syntax with any of the other stores. The idea is to kind of bring this level of identity and design to our other stores as well. But there's also interference there as well, because we have strategically put I don't know if strategic is the right word, but we have put our stores in very historic districts, whether it's like in the Soho or in San Francisco. So it's very limiting on what we can actually do to carry this level of identification. But I was able to bring this into Boulder. This is considered a historic part of Boulder. I've always had trouble with the town of Boulder as far as trying to get permits across. But what I found throughout the years is if you talk about safety and identification and bringing more money to Pearl Street, they tend to be a little bit more lenient. Here's a picture of it at night. And it's fun because when I was teaching at RimCAD and I was teaching experience design, I would always say, hey, building identification is 90% identification and 10% advertising, right? And in this case, where we see the whole store is like architecture as sign, right? Where the dunnies act just as much as a sign than the actual physical signs you see. It really is somewhat advertising, right? People find this interesting, and we get a lot of looky-loos like, what is this place? And I think that is a little bit of interference for Kid Robot as well, because it's kind of hard to understand what we do. But it goes without saying that it is interesting. So sometimes what it really is simple shifts to maximize your desired outcome, right? What are these simple shifts that we can make to bear more fruit? Well, a simple shift is to change your mentality from a first place mentality to a second place mentality. Saying how we can communicate better with the people we want to build relationships with, right? So here's a great example. John Deere. Everyone's familiar with John Deere. It's a famous tractor company. And this was the logo designed by the office of Henry Dreyfuss back in 1956. And Henry Dreyfuss, if you don't know who he is, or who he was an industrial designer for John Deere. And it's a simplification. I always love looking at the evolution of corporate identity from from how they communicate on like the horse and buggy, very slow, very illustrative, like tons of detail and like gilded work. And it's like, it would never work today because cars, we don't have horse and buggies that travel 5 miles an hour. But the simplification, and so you can see how we simplified the John Deere logo. It has 4 legs. You still see a little bit of perspective, and you see, and it still has 2 sets of antlers, a set of antlers, 2 of them. And this lasted for a little over a year, and until John Deere decided they needed to refresh their design program. And this is their logo on a sign. But in 1967, John Deere approached my grandfather and said, "Hey, can you refresh and update our logo? I think it's time." And he's like, "Oh yeah, sure, why not?" And the funny story about this logo is he struggled with it. He's like, what do we do? And the story goes, he was in the basement with my uncle, who was 13 at the time. And he had the old Henry Dreyfuss logo with the 4 legs and the antlers. And And my grandfather's kind of like a 13-year-old, doesn't know what he's talking about. Just leave me alone. I'm trying to work. And he went to the bathroom. My uncle went to the piece of paper with the Henry Dreyfuss logo, and he kind of marked out 2 of the legs and then 1 of the antlers. Okay? And then my grandfather came back like, wow, that is brilliant. I don't remember doing that, but that's fantastic. That's I'm a genius. So you get this this cool silhouette of a deer inside this this 1960s TV shape, the evolution of that traditional 50s TV shape to what it is there, and he presented it, and he took all the credit for it, because how can a 13-year-old kid design a John Deere logo, right? But this kind of left a problem for John Deere. Huge concerns of the cost of implementation of the program, right? 10 years ago, we had a refresh of our logo, and we had all of our dealers' facilities re-sign their facilities. It costs a lot of money. This sign back in the 60s probably cost maybe around $10,000. It would cost a lot more today. And so there's a level of interference. John Deere was still thinking in that first place mentality. Well, since we already spent the money on refreshing this logo, the dealers are just going to have to deal with it. Because if they want to be in business with us, they're going to have to do what we say. And that's not really fair. It's not cool. But they did know that there was going to be a bit of a revolt, a rebellion on the dealers, and they may lose some dealers from their business, and they'll experience a loss in revenue. But they were prepared to deal with that. My grandfather said, "Hey, you know what?" And this was actually a really revolutionary idea in the design and in franchising. Like, why don't you lease these signs, and not just lease the signs, but why don't you lease all other materials to these dealers? So you can say, "Hey, we're going to come up with the upfront cost. You just pay us a very reasonable monthly fee, a lease, and we'll take care of it for you." The dealers jumped on it, and it became an extremely successful program because of the longevity of this logo. It lasted for 33 years, right? They made hundreds of millions of dollars just based on that leasing agreement. It's a simple shift, right? The dealer's like, wow, John Deere really cares for us, and they take care of us. They didn't lose any dealers. They actually increased dealership, and it goes to show, like, if you put the people that you're trying to work with before you, right, and you provide with them what the needs to do business for themselves, the fruit of your labor is going to outweigh the simple shift that you had to make, the simple way of thinking of how to do business, right? And it's a lot of other franchises, like McDonald's, took the same business approach as far as leasing their corporate identity to their franchises, right? Brilliant. Right. Back in 2008, I worked for a company called Fondea in Mexico City, and they're a consultancy for philanthropic projects for large corporations, right? And they were struggling, right? And it always starts like, what I found is always starts as like, we need a new logo. I'm like, okay, I can design a logo for you. I like designing logos. They're fun. But I asked, like, why are we designing a new logo for you? Well, we get a lot of comments that, and I probably should have showed you their old logo, but it's kind of embarrassing. But this is just an adaptation of what they had. But it's like, well, we get a lot of comments that people don't get it. I'm like, oh, okay. So what this represents is kind of like the process that they go through, and it forms an F, and it's kind of like gold rings, and it's like, whatever. The logo isn't going to solve their problem, right? And from that, I created very, the typical, the very expected, collateral for them. Like, here's an envelope, here's a business card, here's a brochure, and then here is a postcard. They're like, awesome, this is fantastic. You're doing such a great job for us. I'm like, okay, and I'm thinking, like, dude, seriously? This is like 30 minutes. And then designing at the reception area. People didn't know how to engage their environment. So design a simple, clean, very Mexican, modern type of reception area for them. still not solving their problem, right? Because they were finding that there's a level of disconnect between them and their clients. You know, at the time of delivering the final program to them. And I found out this is what they were delivering to their clients as their final deliverable. And they weren't selling it. They were like, this is like, hey, this is all the work that we're doing for you. Here you go. Isn't this awesome? Look at all this work. It's like, and that's the first place mentality. It's like, look at this. I did so much work for you, right? And you should be so proud of me. Well, the guy that's, you know, or lady that's receiving this, like, dude, what the hell do I do with this thing? I'm glad that I can see that I was paying you a lot of money, you know, to do all this work, but I have no clue, and I don't know if I can continue this relationship. So what I said, hey, send me all this stuff, and I'll scan it in, and I'll make it pretty for you, and I'll organize it in a way that it's easily accessible, easily, you know, handled by the person that you're delivering it to. And this is the book that I came up with. It's a case study. I mean, we all see case studies, right? And I was thinking, like, you guys never like put together a case study before, but this was revolutionary for them. I mean, and they were able to take this book. We were able to print it. You know, it wasn't cheap, but they were able to sell it for a profit to their customers, and they were actually able to increase their revenue and their relationship with their customers by saying, hey, and at the end of it, this is what we delivered for you. And then we put some French fries in the bottom of this. But what it really comes down to is second place is the ultimate winner. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of discipline to say, hey, you know, I'm going to put someone else before me, right? And whether it's in our personal relationships or in our relationships with our clients or customers, or trying to communicate that through the business model, it's really hard because, you know, I want to be heard as a human being. I want people to accept me for who I am, right? But what I really need to do is say, hey, you know, I want to be in relationship with you. You know, what do you need from me? So I'm going to leave you guys on a little cute little story. My mother was out with her girlfriends drinking wine, and one of her girlfriends pulled out her wrist, right? And her husband had given her a $10,000 diamond, you know, tennis bracelet. All the women were like, holy shit, that is awesome. And they were like looking at it, and she's like, aren't I special? And then my mother got a gift that same day too. It's like, so she pulled out her card that my dad wrote to her, right? And she started reading the letter to them, like the sweet little personal note that my dad sent. And the icing on the cake was, he actually licked the you know, the stamp, put it on the envelope, and mailed it to his own house, right? And it was that part of the story that left the women like, oh my gosh, that is so sweet. Well, the next day, the guy that bought the husband that bought his wife the $10,000 tennis bracelet cornered my dad and go, what the heck, man? You know, I spent $10,000 on this tennis bracelet, and my wife can't stop talking about that $2.50 card that, you know, you sent your wife. And my dad's like, actually, I made that card myself, and all I had to do was pay for postage. So the point of that is, like, the guy's mentality was actually the first place mentality, because although he was trying to show his wife love through a really expensive tennis bracelet, it was really about his vanity, right? About, hey, look at me, I have the means to provide give my wife a $10,000 tennis bracelet. You know, but my dad, on the other hand, was like, hey, you know what? I have the means to sit down and actually think about my wife, write a letter to her, actually craft the card, you know, got his bone tool out, scored it, right, folded it so it didn't get like really nasty kind of fold, and like, you know, hand calligraph the letter to her, and then, you know, maybe spray this cologne and put something with this preparation H on it so it smelled like it, right, and mail it to her. You know, it's something special like that, you know. And the funny thing about the guy that, you know, did the $10,000 tennis bracelet, he was probably like joking with his guys at the country club. I said, hey, you know what, guys? I just got my wife a $10,000, you know, tennis bracelet. This will shut her up for another 6 months. And you hear that BS all the time. Where my dad was like, hey guys, I sent my wife a card, and hopefully this will bring us closer together for years to come, right? So how do we translate this into how our relationships in the business world and as far as communicating? And I really think that, communicating like a human is really being personal and growing in intimacy with other people, right? And we strengthen those relationships, and the transactions just flow without you even trying. That's my talk. Thank you.